Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us. In the face of consistent clamor by some Nigerians for a military takeover, the Nigerian military has reaffirmed its commitments to democratic rule. Tonight, let's speak with the security consultant and CEO, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Dr. Adamu, good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's so good to see you again.
Same here. Good evening.
Right. So this clamor for military rule from some quarters, what do you think is responsible for this agitation?
I think it's quite unfortunate. Anyone who understands the history of Nigeria and, in fact, who has lived under the military era, it's quite unfortunate, really, that the reference will be made to return to that era. Having said that, across the Sahel and, of course, the West African sub-region, of recent, we've seen several coup d'etats that have occurred. The most recent one has been in Niger Republic. Now, after that coup, a couple of things became obvious. Number one is the question of whether democracy has provided the necessary needs of the citizens of those countries. And so a lot of conversation is ongoing at the moment on whether how most African countries have embraced or are practicing democracy is meeting the needs. And I think that debate is also ongoing here in Nigeria at the moment. The second thing that has arisen is the role of the military in either supporting democracy or, in some instances, steering democracy back to what it's meant to be. Now, in both instances, the argument has been, well, if the type of democracy that has been embraced in those countries is not solving the basic needs of the citizens, starting from the economy to security to their social needs, then perhaps there is a need to consider other options of government. And I think it is that kind of debate that we're seeing in Nigeria at the moment. But the good thing is that there is, in terms of the reactions that we've seen from, starting from the military itself, the Chief of Defense Staff himself has come out to state clearly and unequivocally that the military is subservient to the civilian government and that it would continue to play that role. And then more recently, the Chief of Army Staff has also stated that. I have also heard, even though it hasn't received the kind of public attention that of the CDS and the Chief of Army Staff got, I've heard the Chief of Naval Staff and then, of course, the Chief of Air Staff also repeat that. So it appears at least the hierarchy of the military prepared to continue supporting this component. But suffice to say that these two discussions regarding the failure of democracy to meet the needs of several parts of West Africa, including in Nigeria, is a narrative that is quite very strong at the moment.
Right. But, Doctor, as a security expert, do you agree that the worst civilian rule is better than the best military regime?
There are a couple of, I would say, perspectives in this matter. Those who consider freedom, of human rights, freedom of association, and several other components of the international humanitarian law and other aspects of our existence, who consider that as the very basis of human existence, would say that the worst form of civil rule is better than the best form of autocratic or military rule. However, there are others who would say, okay, how about security? Where there is a complete failure and breakdown of security, like we're seeing in several African countries, and then where we're seeing politicians actually, behaving in a manner that shows clearly that the national interest of their countries is not what they are after, then perhaps the only option available would be the military option. So that debate is out there. But personally speaking, I would say that the desire to correct itself, every democratic experience, every democratic journey has that ability to correct itself. And I think I would rather have that where we allow perhaps the mistakes that our democratic experiences would learn from. I mean, if you look at back in Nigeria, especially in this Fourth Republic, several occurrences. The most recent, and I think that is very obvious to us, I will just mention two. During the time of Yaradua when he was ill, and then the role played by the National Assembly then And then, of course, more recently, when former President Obasanjo attempted his third term and we saw the role played by the National Assembly, all of these are corrective measures. If you go to Senegal at the moment, that is at the height of the conversation in West Africa, when the current president attempted to extend his tenure, it was the courts that came in to at least prevent the kind of chaos that we would have seen in Senegal, even though it's still not over, but at least we've seen clearly that the courts are playing that role. So I'd rather have that, where the three institutions, and I think this is what we need to really focus on in Nigeria, the role that is being played by the three institutions, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. If we continue to insist on the independence and the autonomy of all of these three arms of the democratic system, their ability to check each other, then I think the mistakes will be done as we're seeing, but then they will be corrected. I would rather have that than, the military, for instance, truncate that democracy and then take us back 100 or even more years than that.
Right. I mean, part of the reason we're having this conversation tonight is because this is not the first time the Nigerian Army is talking tough on containing all forms of threats to the nation's sovereignty. For you, how important is it for the military to keep on doing so?
So, I mean, and I'll speak really frankly, it is more than, it transcends the military. We have challenges that as a country, we need to look at ourselves in the mirror and admit we have those challenges and correct them. As you know, I run a consultancy, a company, and what we do is we document fatalities. And we know that last year, over 9,000 Nigerians were killed. We also know that just a few days ago, the Global Terrorism Index released its report, and it shows that we have plateaued in terms of the number of terrorism fatalities that have been recorded. We're still, and I think our position has not changed from previous year to that. So this is not the time to clap. It is the time to look at ourselves and tell ourselves the truth. The errors and the mistakes that we've been making need to be corrected. Earlier on, I spoke about the narrative, which is discussing the failure of democracy to meet the aspirations of average Nigerians. We're at a situation right now where so many indices that depict the possibility of us being a fragile state are there. Is it the indices of out-of-school children? Is it the indices of the poverty level in the country or the unemployment level? All of these indices, including social cohesion, speaks to us as being a fragile state. Now, at what point are we going to admit and then start taking corrective measures? I think this is the time. It's not the role of the military. For as long as we allow these structural deficiencies to exist, then this type of discussions will emerge. Because frankly, if we're going to do a survey today, you find out that a lot of Nigerians are unhappy. People who can't feed themselves, people whose families sleep with hunger, they are not happy, and there are a lot of them out there. And these are structural issues that can be corrected. If we admit as a country that we have these structural issues that transcends the military, actually, it goes deeper than that. It speaks about governance. And I think the moment we do that, then we would reduce these types of conversations coming on. If we don't do it, then unfortunately, these conversations will continue to rear their ugly head.
All right. Let me also have your perspective on this. Recently, some military personnel came online to express their poor welfare packages. Can there be a reform to fix this once and for all?
Yes, definitely. And I'm quite delighted that if you look through the renewed hope agenda of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, it is one of the cardinal components of his administration. It's stated there in the renewed hope agenda. It was also repeated in the PAC documents, the Policy Advisory Council documents that were produced post the inauguration. And then, of course, as part of the 9 imperatives for the government, it is also included there that the welfare of especially frontline officers of all, both the military and the paramilitary organizations would be reviewed and, of course, increased. Now, so it's there. It's a policy statement. What now is remaining is to ensure the implementation of that. And I will always say that the president has provided a very good platform. We know his agenda, his manifesto as contained in the renewed hope. He has appointed ministers. He has also signed performance bonds with these ministers. And I'm very delighted that the performance delivery process, which is headed by the presidential advisor on policy and coordination, Hadiza Bala, is ongoing at the moment. So hopefully by April, the first review will be conducted to see where these ministers have gone in the implementation of this component. And one of the first things we're hoping to see is this point around the welfare of these officers. If officers are complaining about their welfare and we're seeing the type of, I would say, largesse that is being spent, then they should be listened to. And I think it's absolutely fair that such aspects be looked at. You cannot have a situation where your military is spread thin. Just recently, over the weekend, last weekend, we saw how in a part of the Northwest, gunmen were able to capture a military armored vehicle, and they were able to show through videos how they were destroying that vehicle. As a Nigerian, I was totally unhappy about that. I haven't seen any statement, and I say it with all sense of responsibility, by any government official condemning that action and trying to shore up support for the military. Now, we cannot continue to have that. The military are sacrificing over and over again. We as Nigerians need to come together and continue to support them. And one of the easiest ways we can do that is to address issues around their welfare. And I'm very delighted that the president has stated that he will do that. What remains to be done is to make sure that it is done. And like I've mentioned, there is a process that is ongoing. So wait till April and see how far that has gone.
Right, but with some West African countries taken over by the military, do you see this trend spreading on the continent?
I hope not. And the statement by ECOWAS is quite emphatic. We saw how they responded to the Nigerian coup d'etat. Unfortunately, there were mistakes that were done in that regard. But in terms of the resolve, I think no one is in doubt about the resolve of ECOWAS to support democratic transition. We also saw what they did when Senegal attempted to do what it did. So I'm not in doubt that there is totality in terms of the unison of efforts in ECOWAS to continue to support the, the democratic institutions within and the growth of democracy. But like I said earlier on at the beginning, the question is being asked for what intent, for what purpose is the democracy if it's not meeting the needs of the people. If at the moment there is no indices, that you pick up that you don't find out that the highest in the world is found in West Africa, or at least a part of the Sahel, and sadly, including in Nigeria. So we should stop kidding ourselves. We should look at ourselves in the mirror and reverse that. And the best way to do that is to spread good governance at the federal level, at the state level, and then, of course, at the local government level. A lot of discussion is ongoing at the moment, apart from what I mentioned earlier on regarding the renewed hope agenda by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. I know even the parliament, the 10th Assembly, is considering a review of the constitution, and I'm hoping that they too should look at components of good governance. In one of the debates they held today, I heard the former Senate President speaking about the need for them to enhance their oversight function. And I'm hoping that they will do that within the security sector. Now, all of these elements of good governance is what would help reduce the possibility of the occurrence of more coup within West Africa. For as long as we do not improve on governance, on good governance, then sadly the specter of coup would remain around with us.
All right. We'll come back to that conversation if time permits us. But let's put this conversation into proper perspective. Nigeria has enjoyed 24 years of uninterrupted democracy. So far, how will you assess the country's democratic journey?
I would say checkered. In some instances, there has been good progress. In some instances, unfortunately, there hasn't been. So as an example, we do have a very strong and quite commendable civil society. The media has grown from what it used to be to where it is today. I'm very delighted around the technology component that the media has been able to embrace. There was a time when we were very concerned regarding the advent of social media and how it could challenge traditional media, but I think a lot of media houses have really gone far in terms of the synergy that we're seeing between traditional platforms and then the social media platforms. We're seeing a lot of advent in terms of investigative journalism coming up. But sadly, there are several other areas that I'm hoping that we see progress. One key area that we're not discussing enough is the National Assembly. That arm of government, I think, would need to increase its capacity, especially for oversight function. Its role cannot be overemphasized. When people bandy non-kinetic and kinetic approaches to managing security, I do not think we need to even discuss this as much if the National Assembly is playing its oversight function. A critical component of the provisions in our budget is actually about the non-kinetic component of approaching security. So all they need to do is to go ahead and make sure that those things are being implemented. And what are those things? Education. We can't have a country where we have the highest out-of-school children in the world, and then yet we have viral and strong institutions of government like the type we have. And then, of course, the issue of corruption that continues to bedevil us as a country, despite the proliferation of institutions that we have for managing corruption. The EFCC is there, the ICPC is there, the NFIU, name them, they are all aspects that can contribute to that. And then several others that are not as well known as these three that I've mentioned. But yet, corruption remains a huge issue within the country. So these are all gaps and pitfalls that remain to be addressed, despite the huge strides that we've made. Like you rightly indicated, 24 years, this is the longest spell that we've had in our democratic journey. And I'm hoping that that spell will continue and it would continue to make progress in terms of the growth that we would experience, both in terms of mistakes that will be corrected, and then more importantly, good governance, so that Nigerians will be proud and happy to say, yes, this is what the dividends of democracy, this is what they're getting. At the moment, a lot of Nigerians do not feel that that dividend is coming to them.
Right, so talking about good governance, one of the most popular definitions of democracy is government to the people, for the people, and by the people. But in talking about deepening good governance, what more do you think can be done?
In simple terms, let's replicate, even if it's by 50%, what we've been able to achieve at the federal level in terms of the checks and balances that we're seeing between the executive arm and the other two arms. We haven't achieved that in a lot of out of the 36 states of the Federation. Very few states, very few. I think outside of Lagos, I really cannot even recall on the top of my head any other state that has been able to achieve a near separation of powers between these two or three arms of government. Most of the other states, the legislature is in the pockets of the executive arm. And then, of course, the judiciary is also largely influenced by the executive arm. The second component is the rule of law, which cuts across all the three levels of government, both at the federal level, at the state level, and then, of course, at the local government. We need to see an improvement in terms of the rule of law. Offenses are being committed by everybody, actually. As a security practitioner, I know that one of the reasons why we have this level of insecurity in the country is the inability of several components of our law enforcement, and especially our criminal justice system, to play their role in terms of arresting and punishing offenders. And at the political level, it's even worse, because most offenses are being committed. The ability of politicians to influence the outcome of the judicial process, to influence elections, these are all challenges. And then, of course, the last is the fact that we do not have a virile and active local government system. For as long as we continue to maintain this, then sadly, we'll continue to have this challenge. And I think if we're able to look at this from these three angles that I've mentioned, especially this last component, have a local government system that is active and that we are approaching from the same lens that we're approaching the federal level, where there are checks and balances, where the issue of accountability, both financial accountability and operational accountability, are enhanced, then I think we would reduce this sorry state that we're in at the moment.
Right. I mean, from some quarters, some stakeholders opined that some Nigerians who are clamoring for military rule in Nigeria, mostly those who are dissatisfied with the outcome of the last general election. Are you surprised that some Nigerians are even thinking of this? the course of the outcome of an election?
I'm not. So my expertise is on risk management. And one of the things that we've been advocating is for Nigeria as a country to take risk management more seriously. No matter how well you want to think about anyone, you have to have controls in place. All countries that have advanced actually do that. So on the one hand, you trust your citizens, but you also have to have a level of control. Why am I saying this? At the end of the elections, as an organization, one of the things we did is to conduct a risk survey and ask ourselves what would be the likely outcomes. You remember the infamous all eyes on the judiciary. All of us saw it because it was an issue of national discourse. Now, how many of us asked ourselves what would be the consequences of the reactions that followed that? In fact, what led to that all eyes on the judiciary? So all these components, including the outcome of the petitions, how has certain arms of government, and principally I'm talking about the intelligence arm, how have they analyzed the consequences of the outcome of the elections? What kind of risk scenarios have they been able to develop, especially in this era of AI, where even a young child can impute this kind of information into an AI system, and then models will be produced for him. Now, what of the politicians who have the kind of money at their disposal, who are able to do this? Now, why I'm bringing this up is if you cannot think in the manner of your enemy, then you can't even anticipate what your enemy can do. And in this instance, because of the level of dissatisfaction and the possibility of sabotage, if we have not done that as a country, then there is a huge failure in terms of our approach, not just to security, but to risk management. So identifying these likely risks, putting in place mitigation measures, and then building resilience within Nigerians even before they happen. And that leads me to the issue of the use of social media for propaganda, for fake, both misinformation and disinformation. Because it's my field, I know that a lot of that is happening at the moment. And this is principally, and I hate to say this, but one of the pitfalls in this current administration, the inability of especially the intelligence arm to have strategic communication components within their folds, the platforms that they operate, so that they're able to not just to understand, but to counter the consequences of these three elements that I've mentioned, the propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation. Now, I'm sure you'll probably be wondering, how is all of this tied to the coup scenario I'm talking about? Now, the mix, if you have a spectrum of risks, which is what I do, have that spectrum, and then tick each item within that spectrum. Embedded in that spectrum is the possibility of saboteurs, either using the call for a coup or instigating it in certain instances. But where you already have that risk spectrum and you already have mitigants in place, all you do is to just push those mitigants and then they will take care of it. But what I see us doing at the moment, unfortunately, is knee-jerk reactions, mainly because we do not have this framework, this nationalistic approach that is institutionalized and that is able to even consider it before it happens. And I think it's, like I said at the beginning, it's the principal failure of intelligence. And of course, if we speak about intelligence, we know the various platforms in government that have responsibility for this.
Right. Dr. Adamu, let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue this conversation.